Before we begin the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us where you watched it in the comments. The cold had settled early over the Arizona territory that evening, the kind of cold that pressed through shirt sleeves and made the wooden boards of the cabin creak. Elias Ward pushed the door shut behind him with a dull thud as he stepped inside, brushing dry dust from his coat. The lantern on the table gave off a steady, warm light, casting a clean circle across the rough planks of the floor. The fire in the stone hearth burned low, its heat just enough to push back the desert night. Naira sat beside the hearth, her back straight, a small bundle of belongings folded neatly on the floor beside her. She was tightening the leather strap around it with slow, deliberate motions. Her breathing was controlled, but her fingers trembled slightly each time she pulled the strap firm. Elias stopped halfway across the cabin. He didn't speak. He took in the sights slowly, her packed bundle, her coat folded beside it, her moccasins positioned near the door instead of their usual place on the rug. He felt something heavy settle in his chest, something he had been expecting without admitting it. The room, normally quiet in a way he found comforting, carried a different kind of silence tonight. Thin, uncertain. Naira lifted her head. Her eyes met his with calm determination, though the shine in them revealed tension she couldn't hide completely. "This is my last night with you," she said quietly. "I'm leaving." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look away. The simplicity of a sentence hit harder than any dramatic outburst would have. Elias had survived gunfights, storms, and the slow grind of loneliness. But this sentence felt like someone had shifted the ground beneath him. He set the tools he had been carrying on the table, an old habit to buy time when he didn't know what to say. His jaw tensed before he managed to ask, "Why now?" Naira exhaled, her shoulders stiffening. "I've stayed longer than I should. I don't want trouble coming to your door because of me." Elias didn't answer right away. He stepped closer to the fire, rubbing his hands briefly near the flames. His mind worked through the possibilities. An enemy from her past, a threat he hadn't seen yet, or something internal she could no longer hold in. He felt the familiar tightness he always got before bad news. The same pressure that had sat in his chest the day he learned his younger brother wouldn't be coming home. "You think trouble's coming here?" he asked, voice low but steady. "Yes." She kept her hands on the bundle, still gripping the strap as if it could anchor her. "I can't explain it all, but I know it's safer if I leave now." The fire popped, and both of them flinched from the sudden sound. Elias watched her closely. Her face was calm, but her posture told the truth. She was exhausted, tense, ready to walk out into the cold night in order to protect him, even if it meant risking herself. He noticed the slight shake in her right hand, the shallow way she was breathing, and the way she avoided looking at the bed they had shared the space around for months. "Naira," he said, taking a slow step toward her, "you don't need to rush out into the dark. It's better than staying and bringing danger to you." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. She swallowed and steadied it again. "You gave me shelter. I don't want to repay that by bringing you harm." Elias leaned his hand on the table. His thoughts ran fast, fear, frustration, and something deeper he didn't know how to name. He remembered how she had arrived months ago, half-conscious, frightened, and alone. He had taken her in without expecting anything in return. Over time, the cabin had changed. Her folded shawl on the chair, her blankets near the hearth, the soft footsteps he had grown used to hearing in the mornings. Her presence had made the place feel less like a graveyard and more like a home. He wasn't ready to lose that. Still, he struggled to speak. He had spent years protecting himself from attachment, telling himself that solitude was easier than watching someone else die because of him. And now, faced with the possibility of losing her, those old instincts slammed into his chest with full force. "You don't have to go," he managed, but the words came out rough and uncertain. Naira's eyes softened, but her expression didn't shift from her decision. "You don't understand the kind of trouble that follows me." He did understand fear, his own and hers. He could see it clearly, the stress tightening her jaw, the dread she was trying to hide, the way she kept her bundle close as if she expected someone to break through the door at any moment. She stood up slowly, lifting the bundle. Her knees wobbled slightly from tension, but she steadied herself. Elias's breath caught in his throat. His mind ran through every possible argument, every reason she was wrong, but none of it formed into words fast enough. Naira stepped toward the door. Her hand hovered above the handle. He watched her fingers tremble, saw her hesitate for the first time that night. She wasn't as certain as she wanted him to believe. Elias felt the weight of the moment settle on him. If he let her walk out now, it would be like watching his brother slip away all over again. Another loss he had been too slow to stop. He felt anger at himself, fear at the future, and something sharp that pushed against his ribs, the realization that he didn't want this cabin to go silent again. "Naira," he said quietly, "just tell me what has you scared." She closed her eyes briefly. The struggle was visible. Her guilt, her instinct to run, her need to protect him, and her growing fear of losing the one place she had felt safe in months. When she opened her eyes, they glistened with something raw and vulnerable. "I don't want to be the reason you get hurt," she whispered. Elias took a slow breath. His voice finally steadied, grounded in a decision he hadn't made until this moment. "Then let me decide what I'm willing to risk." Naira looked down at the bundle in her hands. She didn't lift the latch. She didn't step outside. Her chest rose and fell with slow, heavy breaths as she realized the choice wasn't as simple as walking away. For the first time since arriving at his cabin months ago, she wasn't sure where her path truly led. And for the first time in years, Elias Ward realized he didn't want to face the night alone. Naira did not move for several long seconds. Her hand stayed on the door latch, her fingers tight around the metal, but she didn't pull it open. The cold air, leaking through the cracks, brushed against her knuckles. Elias watched her closely, noting every flicker in her face, the hesitation, the strain, the exhaustion. He could tell she wasn't certain about leaving, and it wasn't just fear of the dark outside. It was fear of what waited beyond it. She slowly released the latch and let the door settle back into place with a soft click. She didn't turn to face him right away. When she finally did, her eyes carried a quiet defeat and something else he had rarely seen in her: conflict. Elias stepped back from the table, giving her room, not wanting to push her, but unwilling to let the conversation die like unfinished business. He'd always accepted that she came to his place badly hurt, terrified, and alone. He never pressed for details. Not because he didn't care, but because he thought forcing her to talk would only reopen whatever wounds she carried. But now, tonight, he couldn't let silence cover the truth anymore. Naira lowered her bundle to the floor. Her shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight of it had been more emotional than physical. She pulled in a slow breath and finally spoke. "You never asked how I got here," she said, voice low. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready," Elias replied. "I wasn't ready," she admitted, "but maybe I should have been." She sat down near the hearth again, close enough to the fire that the light brushed across her face, revealing the faint scars along her wrists and the bruises she had tried to hide under her sleeves. Elias's jaw tightened as he noticed them again, marks he hadn't been allowed to question. She looked at the flames, not at him. "When you found me, I hadn't slept in almost 2 days. I was running from a group of men who wanted to drag me back to a camp I had escaped from. They weren't warriors. They weren't soldiers. Just men who thought a bounty meant permission for anything." Elias moved closer, careful not to interrupt, but alert, finally hearing the story he had been missing for months. "They caught me near the Painted Mesa," she continued. "Not because I was weak, just because there were too many of them. They tied my hands, kept me near their fire. They said they planned to take me to a man in Cedar Ridge who claimed I betrayed him. He told rumors to anyone who'd listen. Some believed him. Some saw a chance to make money." Her voice tightened. "Either way, they weren't going to let me go." She paused. Elias waited, steady, listening. "I cut the ropes with a rock when they slept," she said. "I ran until my legs gave out. I didn't look behind me. I thought they would kill me if they caught me again. When I finally collapsed near that dry creek, I didn't expect anyone to help me." Her gaze shifted toward Elias, more direct now, but tired. "Then you came." Elias remembered that day vividly. The way she had looked half-conscious and feral, like a cornered animal. He had approached slowly, speaking softly, letting her see his hands. She drank the water he offered only after watching him take a sip first. Even then, she had been trembling from exhaustion. "What I didn't tell you," she continued, "is that one of the men hunting me wasn't a stranger. He was someone from my band, someone whose words carried weight. He told the others I betrayed them during a negotiation with soldiers. He lied, but once a lie spreads, it becomes the only story anyone believes." Elias crouched near her, elbows resting on his knees. His voice stayed even. "Why didn't you tell me all this before?" "Because I didn't want you choosing sides in something you didn't start," she said. "And I didn't want you thinking keeping me here was dangerous." He let out a quiet breath. "Seems like it was dangerous." "Yes," she said honestly. "And that's why I planned to leave before it caught up to us." She lifted her eyes again. There was no panic in them now, just honesty. Elias sat fully on the floor, closer than before, but not touching her. "If those men are still looking," he said slowly, "running won't stop them. You stepping out that door tonight won't erase the trail they already know." She looked down at her hands. The scars along her wrists stood out sharply in the firelight. "When I arrived here, I thought this place would just be a place to hide for a day or two. I told myself I'd leave before I brought danger onto your land. But days turn into weeks, then months. And you never pushed me out." "I wasn't going to," Elias said without hesitation. She studied his face carefully, trying to understand something she hadn't dared ask. "Why did you help me that day?" "You didn't have a reason." He hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but because he was not used to explaining himself. "You were hurt, alone, and I'd seen enough suffering to know when someone doesn't deserve more of it." Naira blinked hard, as if steadying herself. The wind outside scraped against the walls. The cabin felt small, but safe. A contained space holding two people who had been carrying too many secrets. "You should know something else," she said softly. "Those men, the ones who chased me, one of them survived after the last time I escaped. If he's still following my tracks, he might reach this valley sooner or later." "That why you packed?" Elias asked. "Yes. I thought leaving would protect you." He considered this carefully. Fear stirred in him. Fear of danger, fear of failing again, and fear of losing her. But it didn't change what he needed to say. "You running doesn't protect me. It just puts you alone out there again." His voice deepened. "And I hate the thought of that more than whatever trouble might come." Naira's throat tightened. She didn't respond immediately, but her eyes softened with something deeper than gratitude, something closer to trust. The tension in the room shifted. The silence no longer felt like the end of something, but the beginning of a decision neither had fully made yet. She pulled the bundle onto her lap and looked at it, as if reconsidering everything. "Then tell me," she said quietly, "what do I do now?" Elias met her gaze, steady and sure. "You stay here tonight, and tomorrow we figure everything else out together." Naira didn't nod, but she didn't resist either. Her shoulders loosened. The fear in her expression softened into something calmer, safer. For the first time since the moment she said she would leave, she set her bundle aside and pushed it gently across the floor, away from the door. The fire crackled again, filling the room with steady warmth. Naira stayed seated near it. Elias stayed beside her, and the night moved forward without either of them walking away. Naira sat in silence beside the hearth, her bundle now pushed aside, her hands resting on her knees. Elias remained close, not touching her, but near enough that she no longer looked like she was preparing to flee. The fire cast a steady glow across the cabin, revealing details that had become part of their shared life without either of them naming it. The night was still raw with the weight of her revelation, but neither moved to end the conversation. Instead, the quiet seemed to invite something both of them had avoided, how they had actually come to depend on each other without realizing it. Elias broke the silence first. "You said earlier that trouble might find its way here. Has anything happened before tonight that made you think that?" She hesitated, then nodded. "There were signs. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure." Her voice tightened. "But now you should know." Her answer reopened a question listeners might have had. Had there been danger earlier that Elias didn't see? Had Naira been watching someone approach? Why hadn't she told him sooner? She continued, addressing those unspoken questions naturally. 3 weeks ago, she said, I found a boot print near the creek. It wasn't yours. Too wide, too deep, and turned outward. Whoever it belonged to was following the water, trying not to leave a trail on open ground. Her hands tightened. I erased it before you came back from checking your traps. I didn't want you to get worried. Elias frowned. Why didn't you tell me then? Because I wasn't sure if it was connected to me or just a hunter passing through. I didn't want to make you carry the fear I was already carrying. Elias felt frustration rise, but not anger. Fear mainly. Fear that he had been living unaware of a line of danger running right beside him. Fear that she had been carrying it alone. He tried to breathe through it and forced himself to stay calm. What else did you see? He asked. A broken arrow shaft near the ridge. Fresh wood, not weathered. Someone snapped it recently. She paused before adding, I also heard horses one night, stopping and starting as if someone was checking the terrain. They didn't come close, but they were out there. Elias sat back, absorbing that information. The cabin didn't feel unsafe, but he understood now that safety was never guaranteed. It had only been borrowed time. The fire settled into quiet crackles, and Naira continued, filling in gaps listeners would have wondered about since Chapter 1. How did their daily life really look? How did they grow close? What did their routine reveal about their unspoken bond? She took a slow breath. Before all that happened, before I started watching for signs, I didn't plan to stay here long. You know that. She offered a faint, tired smile. Yet somehow the days kept passing. Elias leaned his elbows on his knees. I noticed. The truth of it pulled both of them into remembering the months between her arrival and tonight. Those memories filled the room like a quiet presence. At first, she had barely spoken. She moved softly, always checking the corners of the cabin before sleeping, keeping her back to the wall. Elias had given her the space she needed, sleeping on the cot near the window instead of the bed, leaving her half of the cabin untouched, speaking only when necessary. But slowly, their days had begun blending together. She learned where he kept spare nails in the barn, how he stacked firewood, how he lined up his tools by size. She respected the order without comment. In return, Elias found her small arrangements in the cabin. Her folded shawl placed neatly near the hearth, her herbs drying on the windowsill, her washing bowl always cleaned after use. There were small daily moments that neither fully understood at the time. When Elias returned late from checking fences, she always had coffee ready, though she pretended she made it for herself. When Naira woke from nightmares, Elias quietly stepped outside to check the horses, giving her space to steady her breathing. When she mended his coat, she said it was because she had spare thread, though he knew she had gone into town weeks earlier to buy more without telling him. Those months mattered, Elias said now, his voice lower than before. We built something here. Naira didn't deny it. Her eyes stayed fixed on the fire. I know. That's what made leaving harder. He studied her face carefully, how she carried her exhaustion, how tension pulled at the corners of her mouth. She had lived in survival mode for so long that her shoulders never fully relaxed. Do you ever sleep without fear? He asked quietly, aware it was a personal question, but needing to understand. Her answer came slowly. Sometimes, on nights when the wind is soft, or when I wake up and remember where I am. She looked at him then. But fear doesn't disappear just because a place feels safe. That sentence explained more than she intended. Why she hesitated tonight, why she had stayed for months despite planning to leave, and why she kept watching the horizon every evening. Elias nodded, steady. You don't have to hide those things from me. She held his gaze. And what about you? Do you sleep without fear? His jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of such a direct question, but running from truth had never brought him peace. He forced himself to answer. Most nights, no. I keep expecting something to go wrong. Something I should have stopped, but didn't. Her expression softened, understanding him without judgment. Your brother? He looked away briefly, the ache recognizable but not overwhelming. Losing him changed everything. After that, I moved out here to keep people safe from me, I guess. Or from my mistakes. Naira didn't flinch at his honesty. You're not the reason he died. I was the one who planned that job, he said. I should have seen the danger sooner. I should have been faster. Silence settled again, heavy, but connecting rather than distant. Then came the question Naira had been avoiding, the one many listeners would be curious about from the earlier chapters. Why did she start to stay longer? Why grow attached if she knew danger followed her? She answered without being asked. When I first came here, she said, I didn't trust you. I didn't trust anyone. But you never pushed, never demanded anything. You let me choose everything. Where to sleep, when to talk, how long to stay. She paused. It's rare for someone like me to have choices. Elias felt a tightness in his throat that wasn't pain, but something closer to recognition. He understood the importance of choice, how it had been torn from him, too, when his brother died. Naira continued, voice steadier. That's why I stayed. Not because this place is safe, but because you never tried to take anything from me. You never tried to control me. And for someone who has run from one cage after another, that meant something. Elias absorbed her words in the quiet. He didn't respond with grand statements. He didn't know how. But he understood more clearly than ever why her leaving tonight felt like losing something vital. A new question formed in his mind, one that mattered for the future. If danger finds us, he asked, do you trust me enough to face it together? She looked at him, eyes steady, breathing calm. I don't know if I trust anyone with danger, she said truthfully, but I trust you with me. The firelight flickered, reflecting in her eyes. For the first time that night, Elias felt something shift, not the end of fear, but the start of something stronger than running. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. Naira reached out slowly and pulled her bundle closer, not to pick it up, but to open it. She loosened the strap, unfolded the top layer, and removed her coat. She shook it out gently and hung it back on the hook beside the door where it had stayed for months. Her choice was not final yet, but it was no longer escape. It was reconsideration, and the night, once filled with the tension of goodbye, settled into a fragile, uncertain peace as the fire burned lower and the danger outside slowly crept closer without either of them knowing. The fire had burned down to a steady glow, throwing soft light across the cabin walls. Naira sat with her coat, now hanging on the hook, an unspoken sign that her decision to leave was no longer immediate. Elias remained close, his posture calmer but still alert, as if one wrong word could make everything collapse again. The air between them felt heavier now, but clearer. They had crossed a line in their conversation that neither had dared approach before. Naira watched the flames and seemed to measure her next words carefully. She looked tired but more grounded, as if speaking the truth earlier had loosened something inside her. Elias noticed the difference. She no longer sat like someone preparing to escape at the slightest noise. Her hands were steadier, her shoulders less rigid. You asked why those men would chase me, she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. I didn't tell you the full story before. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I was ashamed of how everything happened. This was something listeners of the earlier chapters would have wondered. What exactly happened in her tribe? Why was she accused? What was her role in the conflict with soldiers? Who betrayed her? She continued, addressing those unanswered questions without hesitation. It started 8 months before I reached your land, she said. There was talk of soldiers moving closer to our territory. A traitor, someone we should never have trusted, claimed he could help negotiate peace. He acted friendly, brought supplies, shared news. My band believed him, or at least some of us wanted to. Elias nodded slightly, prompting her to continue. My leader asked me to speak with the soldiers because I knew some English. Not well, but enough to understand basic demands. I went with a trader and a few warriors to meet them near the river. It was supposed to be calm, just words, but the trader was dealing with both sides. Naira's jaw clenched. She looked up briefly, as if steadying herself against the memory. He told the soldiers that our warriors wanted to trade horses for ammunition, which wasn't true. He told our warriors that the soldiers demanded we give up land to avoid a raid, which also wasn't true. He created confusion on purpose. When both sides grew tense, someone fired a shot. No one knows who pulled the trigger first. By the time the dust cleared, 2 of our warriors were dead, and the soldiers blamed us. Elias felt a cold pressure in his stomach. And they blamed you for it. Yes. She swallowed hard. The traitor claimed I had spoken privately with the soldiers and arranged a meeting to lure our warriors into a trap. He said I whispered to them before the fight. Her voice broke slightly. I didn't. I only tried to calm everyone down. But in the chaos, no one listened. Her hands twisted together tightly. Elias could see the stress rising in her shoulders again. I went back to the camp expecting to explain everything. But the traitor reached them first. He said I betrayed my own people. Some believed him. Some didn't. But the ones who believed him were loud and angry. They demanded punishment. Elias kept his voice steady. What kind of punishment? Naira's eyes dropped to the floor. Exile, at best. At worst, execution. Elias inhaled sharply, the seriousness sinking in. He had thought her fear was tied only to bounty hunters or the men who captured her near the mesa. But this was deeper, more painful, more dangerous. I tried to run before the decision was made, she said, but I wasn't fast enough. The traitor and 3 of his men caught me near the ridge before dawn. They tied me up and planned to bring me to a man in Cedar Ridge to collect a reward. A made-up reward. Something they invented to make their lie look official. She paused, letting the truth settle in the room. One of the men who caught me, someone from my band, he used to be close to me. A friend. Her expression darkened, a mix of anger and heartbreak. He believed the traitor without asking me anything. He didn't give me a chance to speak. Elias stiffened. A betrayal like that explained every wall she had built, every panic in her eyes, every long silence. When I escaped, she said, the traitor sent others after me. Some for money, some for revenge. They think I'm responsible for deaths I tried to prevent. She looked at the fire again, voice low. And if they find me here, they won't care about you. They won't care you helped me. They'll see you as someone who sheltered a traitor. Elias leaned forward, his tone grounded and controlled. You're not a traitor. Her lips parted slightly, surprised by the firmness in his voice. And I'm not letting liars decide what happens on my land, he added. She watched him carefully, trying to understand whether he said it out of anger, loyalty, or something deeper. She didn't speak, but her breathing slowed, the panic fading slightly. Elias then asked another question listeners might have wondered. The men who chased you, could they still be close? Naira nodded. Most likely. They'd follow any rumor. And if they heard I was seen in these parts, they'd move this way. Elias processed that quietly. He didn't panic. He didn't show fear. But inside, his mind sharpened around a single clear truth. Running tonight wouldn't solve anything. If danger was out there, it had already been tracking her for months. He spoke slowly, making sure she heard the certainty in his voice. You're not alone in this. Not anymore. Naira's eyes glistened slightly in the firelight. You don't owe me anything, Elias. I know, he answered. That's why this is my choice. For the first time since she had walked toward the door hours earlier, she looked fully disarmed. No walls, no tension, no hard mask. Just a woman exhausted from running and unsure how to accept safety. A long silence settled again, but it felt different now. Not tense, not fearful. It felt like clarity. Finally, Naira spoke again, softer than before. If those men come, you should know they won't talk first. I'm aware, Elias said, and I'm ready for them. Her gaze lingered on him, trying to measure the truth of his words. She saw no hesitation. That steadiness made something loosen in her chest, a feeling she wasn't sure she trusted yet, but wanted to. She looked at the bundle lying open beside her and slowly began to remove the rest of her belongings, placing them back where they belonged. Her shawl on the chair, her herbs on the windowsill, her folded dress on the shelf Elias cleared months ago. Elias watched the quiet, deliberate motions and understood them for what they were. Not a retreat, but the beginning of trust rebuilt piece by piece. Outside, the desert wind shifted. Somewhere far off, a faint echo of hoofbeats rolled across the valley, so distant neither of them noticed, but close enough to announce what would soon reach their doorstep. Naira stayed on the hearth rug until the fire burned low, then leaned back against the wall, exhaustion pulling at her eyes. Elias remained on the floor beside her, resting his back against the edge of the bed frame. The danger was coming. The tension was rising. But for the first time since she arrived at his cabin months ago, Naira wasn't preparing to run. She was preparing to stay. The fire had settled into a long line of glowing embers by the time the cabin grew quiet again. Naira sat leaning against the wall, her eyes lowered, her thoughts circling around everything she had just revealed. Elias rested a short distance from her, his back against the bed frame, legs stretched out, hands loosely clasped. Both looked exhausted, but neither was ready to sleep. Outside, the wind pressed softly against the windows. The room felt still, but not empty. There was a weight in the air that hadn't been there before. Truth, finally spoken, and the consequences that came with it. For a long moment, Elias watched Naira's expression. She wasn't trembling anymore, but he could see the strain behind her calm. Her story had open wounds she had tried to bury. Now those wounds were laid bare, and Elias understood something important. She wasn't just afraid of the men chasing her. She was afraid of what being with him would cost him. He shifted slightly, drawing her attention. "You think you brought danger to my door," he said quietly. "But trouble finds anyone out here, even folks who stay hidden." "That's not the same," she replied. "This danger belongs to me, and it'll follow me until it ends." He nodded, slow and thoughtful. "Then let's make sure it ends." Her eyes flicked to him sharply, almost startled by how simply he said it. She studied his face, looking for doubt or hesitation, but she found none. He wasn't being brave in a reckless way. His voice carried the certainty of a man who had lived too long with silence and regret. Elias let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand across his jaw before continuing. There were questions that listeners of the earlier chapters might have wondered. Why did he isolate himself for so many years? What happened with his brother? Why was he so reluctant to speak about his past? Tonight, he answered them. "You told me what chased you here," he said. "Now I'll tell you what kept me here." Naira straightened, sensing the shift. Elias rarely spoke about himself. When he did, it was short, clipped, controlled. But tonight, for the first time, he looked ready to open the parts of his past he had locked away. "My brother died 5 years ago," he said. "Youngest of us. Quick with a smile. Always wanted to prove himself." His voice tightened. "I planned a cattle job that took us near the foothills. I thought the route was safe. I thought we could outrun a storm coming in." He stopped, jaw clenched. "I was wrong." Naira waited, patient and silent. "The storm hit early," he continued. Visibility dropped to nothing, and a group of thieves waited near the canyon trail. We rode straight into them. I fired first. Shouldn't have. Should have pulled it back instead. Should have done 100 things differently. His breath shook faintly. He took a bullet because of my decisions. He was gone before I could reach him. The fire popped, a small sound in the heavy silence. Naira listened with full attention, her face softening with understanding. She saw the grief he had carried like a stone inside him, a grief he never shared with anyone. She saw how it shaped him, his quiet routine, his isolation, his reluctance to ask for anything. "I came out here," Elias said, "because being around people reminded me of everything I failed at. I thought if I stayed alone long enough, I wouldn't put anyone else in danger." Naira swallowed, her voice steady but emotional. "You didn't fail him." "I failed myself," Elias corrected gently. "I failed at seeing the risks, at protecting someone I should have protected." He looked at her then, eyes sharp but not cold. "And I don't want to make that mistake again." She understood the meaning behind his words immediately. Fear formed behind her ribs, not fear of him, but fear of what it meant to stay. "If I stay," she said softly, "you're risking everything again, for someone who may bring more danger." "That's my decision," Elias replied firmly. "Not yours." The words hit her harder than she expected. She blinked, tried to process the weight of them. For months, she had felt like a guest whose time was borrowed. Now, Elias was telling her she wasn't a burden, she was a choice. The fire dimmed further, forcing both of them into softer shadows. Naira pulled her knees up slightly. "You don't know how determined they are. Those men, some are driven by money, some by anger. They think killing me or dragging me back clears their conscience. They won't just stop." "Then let them come," Elias said. I know this land better than any of them, and I'm not letting them take you." Naira looked down, overwhelmed. The tension she had carried all night began shifting into something unfamiliar, a mixture of fear and relief. She wasn't used to someone standing beside her by choice. But there was still one question in her mind, one she couldn't hold back. "Why does it matter so much to you?" Elias's reply was slow, deliberate. "Because losing people breaks a man in ways he doesn't notice until years pass. And because I'm tired of watching the world take things from me." He paused. "And because when you walked toward that door tonight, it felt like the cabin was going back to the way it was before you empty." Naira's breath caught. She didn't speak, but her eyes glistened. She hadn't realized how much her presence had mattered to him. She had seen him as strong, self-contained, unshakable. But now she understood his silence was a shield, not absence of feeling. Elias continued with a steady voice that carried honesty instead of theatrics. "If you leave now, you walk straight into danger. And I live with that weight forever. I can't do that again. Not after my brother. Not after everything we've built here." Her voice trembled slightly. "Elias, I'm tired of running, but I'm scared of what staying will cost." "Staying always costs something," he said quietly. "But running costs everything." Naira stared at him for a long moment, breathing slowly, letting the truth sink in. The cabin felt warmer now, despite the dying fire. Outside, the wind continued softly against the walls, but inside, a different kind of stillness settled, one that felt like the start of something solid. Elias finally stood and added another log to the fire. The flames rose again, spreading a stronger light around the room. "You need to sleep," he said gently. Naira nodded, too drained to argue. She lay down on her blanket beside the hearth, where she always slept. Elias didn't move to his cot right away. He stayed sitting near her for several minutes, watching the fire and listening to the slowing rhythm of her breathing. She wasn't leaving. He wasn't letting her. But the danger she feared was not imaginary. Far out in the valley, beyond the dark ridge, a faint glimmer of firelight flickered. Men camping, waiting, tracking. Neither Naira nor Elias saw it. But the danger she had run from was now closer than ever. And for the first time, they would face it together. A faint sound outside cut through the silence. Distant at first, easy to mistake for the wind scraping against the brush. But Elias' instincts were sharp from years on the range. He straightened slowly, head turned toward the window, eyes narrowing. Another sound followed. A horse snorted, then a low murmur, men speaking in hushed tones. Elias' pulse tightened. He rose quietly, walked to the window, and eased one corner of the curtain aside. The moon was low, throwing a pale light over the valley. He spotted movement near the old fence line, dark shapes shifting between the posts. 3, 4, maybe more. He didn't count out loud. He didn't swear or panic. He simply breathed slowly and turned toward Naira. "Naira," he whispered firmly. Her eyes snapped open instantly. Survival had taught her to wake without confusion. She pushed up on her elbows, scanning the room, sensing the change in him before he spoke again. "They're here," he said. Her breath hitched. "How many?" "Enough," Elias replied, loading a shell into the rifle chamber with practiced quiet. Naira scrambled to her knees, searching for the shotgun Elias kept near the door. Her hands trembled, not from fear of fighting, but from the realization that everything she ran from had finally arrived. Elias crouched beside her, pressing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Breathe. Stay low. Nothing comes through that door unless we let it." His calm steadied her. Her chest tightened, but the panic didn't take over. She loaded the shotgun, holding it low with both hands. Outside, boots crunched on the frost-covered ground. A voice called out, too friendly, too forced. "Anyone home in that cabin? We're looking for an Apache girl who passed through these parts." Naira froze. Elias raised his rifle and whispered, "Stay back from the windows." Another voice joined the first one, rough, impatient. "Heard she was hiding with a quiet cowboy. Heard he's real fond of her." Naira's face hardened, every muscle tightening with dread. The first man laughed. "We ain't here for trouble. Hand her over. We leave peaceful." Elias stepped behind the table, planted his boots firmly, and aimed at the door. His voice cut through the cabin, low and clear. "Nobody here is going anywhere with you." The men outside paused. A moment of dead silence followed, too deliberate, too expectant. Then a third voice answered, colder. "Then we'll take her off your corpse." Naira's breath caught, a small sound she barely let escape. Elias glanced at her quickly, not with fear, but with a look that said, "I choose this fight." The first bullet struck the cabin wall, sending splinters across the floor. Naira ducked instinctively, dragging herself behind the table. Elias stayed low, adjusting his aim toward where the shot came from. He fired once, measured, controlled. A grunt outside confirmed his shot hit its mark. The attackers fanned out. You could hear their boots separating in the dark, positioning around the cabin. Someone yelled for another to flank the back wall. Elias moved fast, pulling Naira by her arm to the opposite corner. "Stay here," he whispered. "You cover the door." She shook her head. "You can't take all of them alone." "I'm not," he replied. "You're with me." It was the first time he had said it out loud. Gunshots erupted again, slamming into the log walls. Elias returned fire through the small gap near the window frame. Naira braced the shotgun, waiting for anyone foolish enough to approach the front door. The men outside realized the cabin wasn't a soft target. One cursed loudly. Another shouted for someone to circle around. Elias grabbed Naira's wrist, pulling her away from the wall just before a bullet whistled through a thin gap between two logs. For a moment, the gunfire faded. Then footsteps approached, fast, reckless. The door latch rattled. Naira steadied herself, fighting instinctive panic. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The door burst open halfway before Elias fired point blank. The man collapsed against the threshold, dropping instantly. Naira gasped, not out of fear, but out of the shock of how close the danger had been. Outside, the remaining men shouted in anger. Their confidence cracked. Some retreated toward the fence. Elias tracked the shadows through the moonlight, firing only when he had a clear view. Minutes passed. Gunpowder filled the cabin with a sharp, metallic smell. Naira's heart pounded hard, but she didn't freeze. She scanned the door and windows, waiting for the next attempt. Finally, the attack began to falter. Elias could hear horses shifting nervously. One wounded man groaned somewhere near the fence. Another cursed and called for the others to fall back. Then came the sound of retreat, boots thudding away, riders mounting hastily, horses galloping toward the ridge. The valley grew quiet again. Elias lowered his rifle slowly, breathing hard but steady. Naira didn't move at first. She was still braced for another attack. When he finally stepped toward her, she let out a shaky breath and set the shotgun on the floor. "They'll be back," she whispered. "Yes," Elias said, voice calm but firm. "But now I know exactly what we're dealing with." Naira looked at the bullet holes in the cabin walls, the dead man at the door, and the dark ridge where the other men had escaped. Her eyes welled, not from fear, but from the heavy realization that Elias had chosen this danger for her sake. "I brought this to your home," she said, her voice cracking. Elias stepped closer, meeting her gaze. "You didn't bring trouble. Trouble followed you, and I'm not letting it take you." Her lip trembled slightly as she lowered her eyes. "You could have died tonight." "So could you," he replied. "But we didn't." She looked up again, tears drying quickly, replaced by a new kind of resolve. "They won't stop. Neither will we," Elias said. For the first time, Naira believed it. Not because danger had passed, but because she had seen exactly what kind of man Elias Ward was when tested. Outside, dawn began creeping across the sky, turning the valley pale and cold. The first battle had passed, but the war that tied their lives together had only just begun. Naira emerged a few minutes later, wrapped in her shawl, her breathing unsteady but steadier than last night. She stopped at the doorway when she saw the body. Her expression tightened, not with guilt, but with the harsh understanding that her past had crossed into this peaceful land and refused to let her go. "We have to bury him," Elias said. Naira nodded. She didn't flinch or turn away. Instead, she walked forward and helped Elias lift the man's arms so they could drag him to a stretch of soft earth near the cottonwood tree. Her movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if the act of burying him was a way to take control of the violence forced into their lives. They dug in silence for nearly an hour. The sun rose higher, turning the horizon pale gold. Elias worked with quiet determination, while Naira scraped soil away with a smaller shovel, keeping her breath steady despite the cold and fatigue. When the grave was deep enough, they lowered the body inside. Naira looked down at the dead man. His name was Rafe, she said unexpectedly. Elias turned to her, surprised. She had never spoken names before. She continued softly. He rode with the traitor. He wasn't the worst of them, but he never questioned the story he was told. Not once. Elias covered the body with dirt without ceremony, but with dignity. When the grave was filled, he placed a flat stone at the head. Naira stood beside him, bowing her head briefly. Not in forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Inside the cabin again, Elias sat at the table, cleaning his rifle. Naira stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the empty ridge. "They'll come back with more men," she said. Elias didn't look up. "The question is how soon." She turned. "We can't wait for them here." This brought up a major question listeners might still have. What now? Would they hide, run, or fight? How would the law in town react if they asked for help? Would Naira be arrested or hunted again? Chapter 7 resolves this clearly. "We ride to town," Elias said. "We tell the marshal what happened." Naira stiffened. "If the marshal hears my name, he'll ask why there's a bounty. He'll ask which tribe I came from. And I'll tell him the truth," Elias answered. "I don't lie for lawmen, but I don't let them twist truth either." Naira swallowed, uneasy. What if he puts me in a cell to keep me safe? What if he sends word to the fort? Elias finally looked at her fully, voice steady. "I won't let him." There was no bravado in the statement, just certainty. They prepared quickly. Elias saddled his horse, Dusty, while Naira packed only what she needed. She hesitated before stepping outside, scanning the tree line. She wasn't afraid to fight. She was afraid of what came after the fight. When they mounted up and rode down the trail toward town, the cold air stung their faces. The land around them was quiet, but fear rode with them in silence. Cedar Ridge was a small settlement out in the open. One main street, 2 saloons, 1 blacksmith, a general store, and the marshal's office tucked beside the stables. People looked up as Elias rode in with an Apache woman beside him. Some stared. Some whispered. A few stepped back, uneasy. Naira kept her shoulders straight, chin lifted. She wasn't hiding anymore. Elias dismounted first, tied the reins, then offered his hand for her to step down. She accepted it without hesitation. The gesture was small, but meaningful. Listeners might have wondered how openly Elias would stand beside her in front of others. Chapter 7 answers, completely and without shame. Together, they walked into the marshal's office. Marshal Avery was a tall, weathered man with a calm, analytical gaze. He looked up from his ledger, eyes shifting between Elias and Naira with immediate suspicion. "You bring in trouble with you, Ward?" Avery asked. "Trouble found my land last night," Elias answered plainly. 4 armed men attacked us. 1 died on my property. 3 ran, all hunting her. He motioned to Naira. Avery's brows tightened. "Why would they be hunting her?" Naira stepped forward before Elias could answer. "Because they believe I betrayed my people during a negotiation with soldiers." "That's a lie." A traitor twisted the truth for money. Avery studied her carefully. "There a bounty on you?" "Not an official one," she replied. "Just men following another man's greed." Elias added, "They killed 2 warriors months ago. She ran. They want to drag her back to finish what they started." Avery watched them both for several seconds, weighing their words. Then he leaned back in his chair. "I know the traitor you're talking about," he said. "McKinnon. Been spreading stories for months. Men like him thrive on chaos." Naira's jaw tightened. He told them, "I led my people into a trap. And you didn't?" Avery pressed, not accusing, just thorough. "No," she said firmly. "I tried to stop a fight. The shot came from someone else." Avery exhaled, rubbed his chin, then stood. "If those men attacked you on your own land, that's an offense. If one died while doing it, that's self-defense." He gestured toward the door. "Take me to where it happened." Elias gave Naira a steady look, and together they led the marshal back to the cabin. When Avery saw the grave, the bullet marks in the walls, and the blood trail leading down the ridge, his expression hardened. "McKinnon's been stirring trouble for a long time," he muttered. "But sending hired guns to kill someone? That's different. What happens now?" Naira asked. Avery met her eyes without hostility. "I'll issue a warrant for McKinnon. If he's spreading false bounties and sending gunmen after you, he answers for it in my jail." Naira's breath caught. For the first time in months, someone with authority believed her. Avery added, "As for you, you're not being arrested. You're not under detainment. You've been chased long enough. Until I sort this out, you stay with Ward. I'll be sending deputies to patrol this valley." Naira blinked in disbelief. She wasn't being hunted here, not by the law, not by the town. Elias put a hand on the small of her back. Steady, quiet reassurance. Her shoulders dropped just slightly, a sign of tension finally easing. They rode back to the cabin side by side. The sun was beginning to sink behind the ridges, casting long shadows across the land. As they dismounted, Naira touched Elias' arm lightly. "They believe me," she said. Elias nodded. "They should have from the start." She looked out at the valley where she had once been a fugitive, then back at the man who had stood beside her when no one else would. For the first time, she allowed herself to think something dangerous and hopeful. Maybe she truly could build a life here. But the threat wasn't gone yet. The men who fled last night had not vanished. And McKinnon, the man who started all of this, still needed to be dealt with before her past could fully release its hold. Elias knew it. Naira knew it. And in the fading light, both understood the same unspoken truth. The next steps would define their future. The ride back from town felt different than the tense approach earlier that morning. The weight of suspicion that usually followed Naira in any settled place had lifted slightly, just enough for her to breathe in a way she hadn't in months. Elias noticed it as he rode beside her. Her shoulders sat a fraction lower, her fingers rested more loosely on the reins, and her eyes, still watchful, carried a small ripple of relief. But he also understood something else. Relief was not the same as safety, and what happened next would determine whether her past could remain behind them for good. When they reached the cabin, the sun was dipping behind the ridge, throwing long shadows across the valley. The land looked calm again, but traces of last night's violence remained. Gunshot marks in the logs, a disturbed patch of soil where they buried a man, and spots of dry blood near the fence line. Naira dismounted first, her expression tightening at the sight. Elias stepped down beside her. "You don't have to look at all that again," he said quietly. "I do," she answered. "It's part of what brought me here." Her voice carried no bitterness, only acceptance. They spent the next hour quietly repairing the exterior. Elias hammered boards over the bullet gaps, added new supports to the weakened sections of the wall, and moved a pair of heavy crates near the windows to use as cover, just in case. Naira helped him silently. She was steady, determined, and focused, no longer the woman ready to vanish into the night. She was someone choosing to stay. As they worked, she finally spoke. "There's something you didn't ask me." Elias paused, wiping dust from his palms. "What's that?" "You never asked why I didn't try to return to my band after escaping. Why I stayed on your land instead of seeking refuge with my own people." Elias studied her, realizing she was right. He had avoided the question because he assumed the answer would hurt her. But now, she looked ready to explain. "I didn't return," she said slowly, "because I didn't know if they would listen. The voices that believed the traitor's lie were louder and stronger. And I didn't want to walk back into judgment when I barely survived the last one." This addressed something listeners might wonder. If her band no longer hunted her, why didn't she go back immediately? Why linger at the cabin? What kept her away? Naira continued, "But that isn't the only reason." Elias waited, not pressing. "When I got here," she said, lowering her voice, "I thought your cabin was just a place to hide. A roof. Nothing more. But every day I stayed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years." Elias' chest tightened, his hands slowing as he hammered another nail into place. "I felt safe," she said. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't softening the truth. She was stating what mattered to her most simply. And that scared me more than the men hunting me. Elias stood still, absorbing her words. He understood perfectly. Safety wasn't something either of them had trusted in a long time. He turned, meeting her eyes directly. You're safe here now, too. Not because danger's gone, but because I'm standing beside you. That's not changing. Naira swallowed, her breath catching with emotion she didn't want to show. Before either could continue, a faint movement on the ridge caught Elias' attention. A small group of riders, just 3, appeared on the high trail, silhouetted against the fading sky. They weren't hiding. They approached openly, calmly, with no guns drawn. Naira stiffened instantly. Not bounty hunters, Elias murmured. Their formation's different. They're riding like scouts. Naira stepped closer to him unconsciously, bracing herself. As the riders reached the lower slope, the lead figure raised a hand, not in threat but in greeting. When they came close enough, Naira recognized the paint patterns on their horses, the familiar clothing styles, the beadwork. Her heart jumped. They were from her band, but they weren't hunting her. They stopped 20 feet away and waited, giving her the chance to approach on her terms. One of the riders, a woman in her 50s with stern eyes and long, graying braids, stepped forward. Naira's breath caught sharply. Anala, she whispered, a distant relative, a respected figure among her people. Elias stayed still, slightly behind Naira, close enough to support her, far enough to show no aggression. Anala's gaze swept from Naira to Elias, then back to Naira. Her face held no hostility. You survived, Anala said in steady English. We heard rumors. Some said you betrayed us. Some said the traitor lied. Some said you were dead. Naira's voice shook. You believe the lies? No, Anala said, but we could not stop the anger of others. The truth took time to reach the ones who needed to hear it. Listeners might ask, how was the lie exposed? What changed? Why come now? Chapter 8 answers naturally. 2 hunters returned from the fort weeks ago, Anala explained. A soldier told them the same story you try to tell us, that the traitor twisted words, created distrust, lied to both sides. The elders met. They agreed you were wronged. Not entirely forgiven, but no longer marked. Naira exhaled shakily, the tension in her frame loosening just a bit. Anala continued, we came to find you, not to take you back, only to tell you this. If you wish to return, you can. If you wish to stay with this man, you can. The choice is yours. Elias felt a slow shift beside him. Naira's entire body softened at those words, a release of a weight she had carried for too long. She stepped forward, emotions flickering across her face, recognition, grief, relief, and uncertainty all tangled together. I'm tired of running, she said quietly. And I found something here I never expected. Anala studied her carefully, then nodded once, as if the answer was enough. We will not come again, Anala said. No one from our band will hunt you. No one will spread the lies. She looked at Elias. Protect her, she said. She has suffered enough. Elias nodded firmly. We will. Anala gave a final nod, then turned her horse. The riders left without another word, disappearing over the ridge as silently as they had arrived. When they were gone, Naira's breath finally broke free. She pressed a hand to her chest, closing her eyes as if steadying herself. Elias stepped closer, but didn't touch her until she opened her eyes again. You're free now, he said quietly. Naira shook her head faintly. Not free, but finally unchained. She looked toward the cabin, the place she had once seen as temporary, fragile, unsafe to claim. Then she looked at Elias. Her voice softened. I want to build something real now. He didn't need to ask what she meant. The look in her eyes said everything. She wasn't choosing safety. She wasn't choosing fear. She was choosing him. As the last light of the sun faded behind the ridge, Naira stepped closer, her hand brushing as lightly, not fully taking it, not rushing, but initiating something new. I'm not leaving, she said. Elias felt something loosen deep inside, something that had been held tight since his brother died. Good, he said, because I'm not letting you. The night settled in around them, not threatening this time, but quiet, full of possibility. Her past had finally caught up, faced her, released her. Now the future was theirs to shape. Night settled across the valley with a calmness that felt new. There were no distant hoofbeats, no shadows moving against the ridge, no dread pressing like a second skin. The threats that had chased Naira across miles of desert had been confronted by proof, by the law, and by her own people. For the first time since she fled her home, the world around her wasn't closing in. The cabin's door stood open to the cool night air. Elias brought in the last piece of firewood, set it beside the hearth, and wiped his hands on his jeans. The fire glowed warm, steady, reflecting off the wooden walls that had taken bullets only a night ago. Now, those same walls felt like protection instead of a battleground. Naira stood by the window, gazing out at the dark valley. Her shawl draped loosely around her shoulders, and a quiet stillness settled on her face, different from fear, different from sorrow. It was peace, unfamiliar but welcome. Elias watched her for a moment, taking in the shift. He didn't step closer immediately. He gave her room, sensing she was gathering thoughts she'd never allowed herself to examine before. "You okay?" he asked gently. Naira turned, her expression soft but firm. "I am, for the first time in a very long time." He nodded once, not pressing further. But there was one question many listeners would naturally still have. What happens now? Would Naira return her band? Would she leave Elias's home now that she was free? Would their bond continue or dissolve once danger passed? Chapter 9 answers these conclusively. Naira approached the table, resting her hands on its edge. "My people gave me a choice today," she said. "I didn't think they ever would." "You earned it," Elias replied. She shook her head slightly. "Maybe. Or maybe they learned the truth too late. Either way, it's mine now." Elias waited, sensing where the conversation was heading, but not assuming anything. Naira continued, speaking slowly, as if each word settled something inside her. "For months, I kept telling myself I'd leave when the danger faded. I convinced myself this was a temporary shelter, a place to breathe until I could run again." She paused, her voice steady. "But every morning I woke up here, the more it felt like a home I never expected." She touched the back of one of the chairs Elias had made. "This cabin saw me at my worst, and you never asked for anything in return. You didn't force trust, or answers, or promises." She looked at him. "That's why I stayed longer than I planned." Elias stepped closer, resting one hand lightly on the table. "And now?" She didn't hesitate. "I want to stay," she said quietly but confidently. "Not because I'm afraid. Not because I have nowhere else. Because I choose this." The cabin's quiet deepened. Elias's shoulders relaxed, a subtle loosening he didn't even realize he needed. He lowered his gaze briefly, absorbing the weight of her words, then met her eyes again. "I've been alone a long time, Naira," he said. "Thought it was easier that way. Thought if I didn't let anyone in, I couldn't lose them." His voice softened. "Then you walked into my life and turned this place from a memory of what I lost into something alive again." Naira's breath trembled, just slightly. "I don't want this cabin empty anymore," Elias continued. "And I don't want to wake up wondering if you're gone." His confession wasn't dramatic. It was simple, honest, grounded in the quiet strength he lived by. Naira stepped closer until she was standing just a few inches from him. "Then we decide something together," she said. "If you want me here, I stay." "I want you here," he answered without pause. The fire crackled, filling the room with a warm, steady glow. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the cabin walls. No longer a warning, just a part of the land settling into night. Naira exhaled, relief and emotion breaking into a small, genuine smile. "Then I'm home." It was the first time she'd said the word. Elias felt something shift deeply inside him. Recognition, belonging, a piece of his heart he thought was dead, finally waking again. He reached out, slowly, giving her room to step back if she chose. Instead, she closed the distance, resting her forehead gently against his chest. He lifted a hand and placed it on her back with the kind of care that had defined their entire journey. Steady, respectful, grounded. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing slowly, feeling the quiet certainty of the choice they had made. When Naira finally stepped back, her eyes were brighter, her voice steady. Tomorrow, I want to help fix the fence and maybe plant something near the cabin, something that grows. Elias smiled softly, small but real. We can do that. She nodded. And the grave we dug, I want to place stones around it. Make it right. We'll do that too. They weren't planning dramatic futures or promises beyond their reach. They were building something simple and strong, one day at a time, side by side. Elias brought another log to the fire while Naira unfolded the blanket she used near the hearth. But when she began laying it out, he hesitated. You don't have to sleep on the floor anymore, he said softly. Naira paused, looking up. Elias added, there's room on the bed. And if you want space, I'll take the cot. But you don't have to sleep alone unless you want to. Her face softened, touched by the offer. She walked to the bed, gently ran her hand over the blanket, then looked back at him. You don't have to take the cot, she said. He understood her meaning immediately, simple, clear, without the need for explanation. They settled into the bed together without rush or grand gestures. No romance forced, no sudden intensity, just two people who had fought to survive long enough finally resting beside someone they trusted. The cabin felt warmer than it had in years. As they lay there, Naira whispered into the quiet, "Thank you for choosing me." Elias replied with the same honest tone he'd carried all night. "I didn't choose danger. I chose you. Everything else is just something we face together." Naira closed her eyes, her breathing finally deepening into calm sleep. Outside, the valley stretched silent and open beneath the stars. Danger had come and gone. Old wounds had been acknowledged and released. A future, real, grounded, peaceful, waited in the morning light. The story ended not with fleeing or fighting, but with belonging. Naira stayed, Elias stayed, and the cabin, once a place of grief and ghosts, became a home again. A true ending, a complete ending, a happy ending.